guys. I'm new here. I'm Prerna, for those of you who don't know me. Yeah, I work at Steampunk. I've been there since August. I work as a DevOps engineer, and I've been a DevOps engineer for about 2 years, almost 2 years, so still kind of new to the field, just trying to learn as much as I can, pick up as much as possible. Steampunk for me has been a good place for that for sure. Okay, you did start the recording, right? Let me share my screen. Share. Okay. I hope you guys can see everything and hear me okay. Okay, cool. Okay, so I'm talking about Markdown today. So I'll kind of give you an overview of what exactly it is that I'm talking about, and also why I'm encouraging you guys to learn it today. And the majority of this talk is going to be kind of a tutorial, like a how-to guide of basic syntax for Markdown. And I'll also give you some references, some resources to get started. So, I guess here's my agenda here again. Let's jump right into it. So what is Markdown? It is a lightweight markup language. So other markup languages are HTML and XML, just to name a few. These are used to format pages. Markdown in particular was created to be human readable though in its source code form. So this is something you're going to see me go back to. The goal really is for the code to be as readable as well as, of course, the document that you're creating with it. And also the file extension is .md. And a couple like fun tidbits, it's actually commonly used to format messages and text in blogs, instant messengers, online forums. So to name a few, Slack, Facebook Messenger, Reddit, all use Markdown to format their text. So once you learn some stuff here, maybe you can try some of this stuff out there. Okay, so why should you learn Markdown? So for one, as an alternative to Microsoft Word, for example, it just offers streamlined formatting. So like I said, all of the formatting is done in code, inline. So we all know the headache of, working on a Microsoft Word doc and really not knowing how to format right, or like what button to click and whatnot, and just like the headache that causes. So Markdown really streamlines all of that for you. All of it's done in code using the syntax. And also the main reason I'm encouraging you to learn Markdown today is GitOps. So GitOps is the idea of treating everything as code, and not only that, but using Git as that single source of truth for that code. And so that gives you all the benefits of Git, which include things like versioning and history. So you can go back to this document and know exactly how it's evolved over time. And also, if you're using this document, for example, with a code repository, which as we'll talk about shortly, it often is, you will know, is it up to date? How has the code evolved along with the documentation? Or, does someone need to go in and update that documentation as well? And finally, you can also see the contributors. So, you can go back and, you have that point of contact if you want to know more about what's going on in this documentation. So GitOps is really the key here to, why Markdown is a good alternative to Microsoft Word or really anything else for documentation. So some use cases are wikis, proposals, project onboarding docs. I personally have used Markdown for all of these, including READMEs. That's really the most common one. I'm sure all of you have seen those before. So those are just used to document in code repositories. So they're usually going to be at the top level. And they're just going to explain the code to clients and the end user, but also to developers. So we all know the struggle of, following on someone else's work. And either, there's no documentation and you have no idea what's going on. So, if you're using Markdown properly and you're keeping that stuff up to date, you have all of the benefits of, of Git. So for example, if you see that the code has been updated, the documentation hasn't been updated in a year or whatever, you can reach out to the right people to fix that pretty much. And how that has changed together. If you are keeping it up to date, you can see how everything's evolved. You can also practice some good old git blame, and, down to each line, who added what, your point of contact there. Okay, now let's jump into some tools that you can use to write your own Markdown code. So my favorite is IntelliJ Community Edition. I use this not just for Markdown, I use it to write all my code. And so the reason I like this specifically for Markdown is you have this panel up here on the right that will render your code live. So as I'm typing, I know exactly what the file is going to look like. You don't have to wait to check in your code to get to know like what exactly is going on, if your syntax is wrong or anything like that. And also there's a couple plugins in IntelliJ that will help you as well, kind of suggest things like, best practice and stuff like that. So very similar, there's VS Code, just another IDE. I'm sure, there's plenty of IDEs out there. It's kind of just a personal preference thing, but it does the same thing where you can kind of see your code as you're writing it. There's really no secret there. What is it going to look like? Okay, and finally there's Git. So if you're not used to an IDE, that's just not something you use every day, there's always Git. You can edit directly in there. So if you have a file, you can go in and hit the edit button right here. I can show you guys that here in a minute once we look at some stuff in Git. And then, so once again, you can see, like, you can write your code, and then there is a preview option. Sorry, my second monitor is blocking out. So there's a preview option, so you can kind of toggle back and forth and see like, okay, what is this going to look like when it's committed and done? And this is super easy because it's in Git. So when you hit your preview, you know exactly what it's going to look like. Then you can do that before you're ready to commit. Okay, so now I've been droning on. Let's look at what Markdown actually looks like, right? What am I talking about here? So this is actually Gene's intro to Docker repo. So this is an awesome use case, one that I actually didn't mention, but also like awesome use for Markdown. So this is just, of course, him teaching someone how to use Docker. And so let's look at a couple elements that he has in here. So of course you can add images, you have all of your headers, you can reference code, and also colorize that, as you can see here. And really all of this is anything that Microsoft Word can do, but just again in Git, and to touch on a couple of those things that I talked about. So you have the history here. If there were multiple contributors, you could see that here. You can see when all of these changes were added and exactly what change was added. You can also see the raw code here. If you want to, steal any of these little tidbits, you can go here and look at those. And again, like I talked about earlier, you can also edit directly in here if you're not comfortable with an IDE or if that just doesn't make sense to you. So yeah, this is what Markdown can look like. Now, if there's no questions, I'm going to jump into the syntax. So if you'd like to follow along, I can show you. Oh, I lost my mouse.
I actually do have a question. I'm just like, I'm playing devil's advocate right now.
Oh, okay.
So what are some of the challenges though that you see? Like this, I mean, I'm on the train, but what are some of the challenges that you see in terms of trying to convince teams to try and actually like be more proactive with documentation?
Okay, so that is kind of a two-part question, or I have a two-part answer, I'd say. So if it's more technical teams, I have this problem with my team personally. Gene can attest to this. They want to write code, right? They don't want to write documentation. Documentation's boring. Gene's like, yeah. No one wants to write the documentation, which is like, it's fair, I get it. But then, and it's funny because we love to complain when things aren't well documented, right? But we don't want to write it ourselves. So we kind of have to like practice empathy there and be like, okay, what about when I don't work here anymore? Or if I move on to a different project, and I want people to use my code. I want this stuff to live on. That's kind of how I try to encourage people to document stuff, but definitely on the technical side, no one wants to do this stuff. And on the non-technical side, the biggest hurdle is just getting comfortable with Git, plain and simple. I was working on a proposal recently, actually, with a lot of biz dev people. And it's not all terribly too difficult, but it is kind of just like that. Oh, I don't want to learn a new tool just to like work on my documents, which I understand. So that's really the two main issues.
Yeah, and Cynthia, I'll say, as someone who does not like to work on documentation, a lot of times it's really easy to do it while I'm doing the coding, because I'm doing it incrementally. I'm doing a little bit at a time, and I'm not sitting down and having to pull up Word to do it. So having it right in with the source code makes it a lot easier for me to motivate myself to do it and to stay current.
For sure. Okay, thank you guys. Okay, any other questions? All right, okay. So once again, I have my code repository here. So all of the examples that I'm going to show you, I have screenshots in this slide deck. But if you kind of want to, get in there and look at it yourself, you can go to that link and either follow along. You can use that as an example for your own Markdown. It's kind of up to you. Okay, let's move right into the examples. Okay, so first we have headers or headings. So this is just kind of, title, subtitle, all of that. So this is pretty straightforward. You just start with a hash followed by the title. And then the number of hashes is going to correspond with the header level. So as you can see, of course, the font is going to get smaller as well with your subheadings. Pretty straightforward again. So a couple of best practices to note here. And these are really going to be consistent throughout Markdown, best practices that you want to follow. So you do want to have blank lines in between various elements, not just headers. And then you also want a space after the hash. So this is just, again, we want to aid in the readability in the source code as well as the document. That's just where those kind of come in. Okay, now we have paragraphs and line breaks. So if you want, I should mention first, as you can see from line 11 to 15, all of those are on different lines, but the text will keep wrapping. So if you don't want it to do that, you want to start a new paragraph, you can put a blank line in between. Again, pretty straightforward. And line breaks, again, if you don't want the text to keep wrapping, you either put 2 spaces at the end of a line, 2 or more spaces, or the HTML line break tag, just again, to aid in the readability. Okay, so emphasis. So how you do bold text is surround your text with either asterisks or underscores. Either one will result in the same thing. Italics, similar, just 1 asterisk or 1 underscore, doesn't matter which one. And also you can do both bold and italics. So it's just going to be 3 asterisks or 3 underscores or a combination of those. One thing to note, you do want to mirror them on both sides of the text, as you can see on line 23 and 25, but the result is going to be the same either way. Finally, you cannot underline in Markdown. It is not a supported feature. Okay, now we have block quotes. So this is just if you have a block of text that you want to be kind of separated, or quote, of course, separated from the rest of the file. So this is, you just start each line that you want to be in the block quote with an angle bracket. And then if you want multiple paragraphs, you just put a blank line in between paragraphs with 1 angle bracket. And then for nested block quotes, so this is just going to be a block quote within a block quote. That's just going to be start the second quote with 2 angle brackets, and then it'll nest it as you see on the right-hand side. Okay, now code. There's a couple different ways to reference code in Markdown files. So if you have just code segments and you want to reference them in line, like with your text, you just do that by surrounding the code segments in backticks. And then you can see it on the right-hand side. I apologize, the color is a little bit hard to see here, but it's just going to kind of colorize it differently and then also change the font so you can kind of like tell what is the code and what is not. Then also code blocks or fenced code blocks. So how you do this is 3 backticks on a line of its own, followed by the chunk of code. This can be, a bit of code, it can be an entire file, whatever you need. And then followed by 3 backticks once again on a line of its own. And finally, we have syntax highlighting. So what I mean by this is how you see at the bottom how the text is kind of colorized and just easier to read. How you do that is after the first 3 backticks, you just put the language that the code is in. So mine's in Java, and so it is using that to colorize the text. And over here, I have a link of all of the languages that are supported by GitHub. The list is honestly insane. There's not a single one I can think of that isn't on there. Like anything you need is supported there. Okay, so now we have lists. There's a few different types of lists in Markdown. So for one, it's just ordered lists. So that's straightforward, just 1, 2, 3, 4. You can do it the obvious way, starting each line with the next number. Also, fun fact, it does not matter what number you pick after the number 1. As you can see with my second insane example, if you want to do that, you can. I often see people just start every line with 1 and then, just go 1, 1, 1, and then Markdown will order it for you, like regardless. Okay, now we have unordered lists rather. So that's just bulleted lists. And a couple ways to do that is either a dash, asterisk, or a plus sign. So that's just how you want to start the line. And then of course have that space after the delimiter. The result's going to be the same. They're just going to look like bullet points, and it does not matter which one you pick, but don't mix and match delimiters in the same list. And then also, I don't have an example of this, I apologize, but you can do nested lists by just the next item that you want to be nested within a list, just indent either 1 tab or I think 2 spaces. Okay, now we have task lists. So this is, if there's items that you want to check off, or like, if you're writing code, there's features that you haven't quite gotten to yet, or things that you're planning on doing. I'll stop. I have a question.
Yes. Okay. Question on the code, color code way, like 2, 3 slides back. Is that universal to all the, like I have DevOps Azure at work. Will that also work too if I change?
I'm sorry, if you change
the like language? For example, your code has a triple tick and then Java. Is that, will it work too if I don't use GitHub and I use DevOps Azure?
I believe so. I know like GitHub, GitLab, a couple different sites that support Markdown do enable this. It of course is going to depend on that, right? So Azure DevOps might have their own list of, however they're colorizing this text. Again, I apologize, I only have this list from GitHub, but just from the research I've done, it should be supported. I haven't really seen anything that doesn't support it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Okay, back to task lists. So again, this is just, if you have features that you want to enable, you want it to be pretty obvious, like, I haven't gotten to this. This is things we have completed. So easy, you just do either a dash, asterisk, or plus sign, whatever delimiter you use, followed by square brackets. So leave those square brackets empty for something that you haven't checked off yet, as you can see on the right-hand side, what that's going to look like. And then put an X in there for something that you have checked off. As you can see, I've only finished Fellowship of the Ring. I'm getting to it, you guys. Okay, now adding elements within lists. So any element that I've shown you or that you will see, and this is really universal, you can kind of mix and match. You can put things within other elements. So for example, if you want to put an image in your list or a block quote in your list, you can do that. How you do that is you just indent the item that you want to be within the list. Again, it is either one tab or, oh, it's 4 spaces. And it'll look like how you see on the right-hand side where it'll be within the list. And that's the same way you can do a list within a list as well. Okay, now tables. So how you do tables is, so however many columns you need at the top, the first line, so that's going to be the column headers, right? So as you see on line 5, so it'll be header and then pipe symbol and then header. And then, so I have 2 columns. You can do as many as you need. So you'll just continue that on. So it'll just be header, pipe, header, pipe. And then on the very next line, you need to have a minimum of 3 hyphens followed by the pipe symbol and then 3 hyphens. And again, that's just going to continue for however many columns you need. And then after that, you just fill in, your rows, of course. So yeah, after that, it's pretty straightforward. One thing to note, you can align the text. So in this table that you're looking at, this will make it a little easier. On the left-hand side, I have everything aligned center. So how you do that is around those 3 hyphens, as you see on line 6 on the left-hand side, you just put a column on both sides of those hyphens for it to be aligned center. And then on the right-hand side, you can see align left and aligned right. So that'll be the colon on the left side or the colon on the right side. And of course, all of your columns don't have to be aligned the same way. Oh, one more thing to note, the columns don't have to look pretty in the code. I mean, that's, I guess, a personal preference, but Markdown will kind of fix that up for you when it renders. Okay, links. So there's a couple different types of links that you can do. The first one is probably the most common. So if you just want to link text, so how you do that is the text that you want to be linked, you just put in square brackets and then followed by the link or the URL in regular parentheses. And so it's going to look like how you see on the right-hand side where it's just the word. And then you can also just put the whole URL in there if you would like. So you just surround it by angle brackets if you want it to be a URL or a link to itself. Finally, my favorite is reference style links. So this is a little bit more complicated, but so what you do is, so say if, I guess a use case for it is if you have one link that you use many times, or if you have a ton of really long links and you don't want it to kind of mess up all your code and again, make it not very human readable because you have your text and then you also have the links in there that can be like insanely long. You can just put all of the links at the bottom. So how you do that is you have, like, as you see on line 20, 21, and 22, the reference in square brackets, and then a colon followed by the URL in angle brackets. And then whenever you use that reference, so as you see on line 17, you don't have to use the whole URL. So you just, so for example, a Markdown repo link is going to be a reference to that link. You can use it as many times as you want, and it's just going to reference that link. And again, it'll just kind of make your files look a little pretty if you're a little OCD like me. It's a great way to do that. Next, images. So images, also straightforward. You just do exclamation point followed by the image name. This is going to be in square brackets, and then followed by the image URL in parentheses. So the link to the image can be from the web. It can also be local on your machine. And if this is something that you're storing in Git, it can be, it has to be, of course, relative to this file. So along with links and with images, it's pretty common to reference something that's in your repo. So this is a great way to do it. You don't have to like reference out to the internet. It's just going to be relative to this file in your repository. And so you can also link those images. So for example, that meme on the right, if you want it to click it and then go to google.com, that's pretty straightforward. So you just surround, same as the regular image syntax, but surround that once again in square brackets, and then follow that by the link in regular parentheses. And then that'll create a link for the image. Finally, videos are not supported in Markdown, although I will say I have not seen it work, but I know that there are HTML ways to get a video into your file. I don't believe it's supported in GitHub or GitLab. That being said, but there are ways that you can use HTML to put in features into your file. I'll talk about that here in a second.
Question on the picture. If I have a big picture, but I want to scale it instead of like a hard code width equals X, height equal Y, how can I do that?
I believe that Markdown will just take the original size. You can use HTML, like the HTML code for an image. I'll actually show you that here in a second, to change the size, like if you want it to be like not the original size of the image, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I was trying that with HTML tags, but I don't know how to do like a ratio wise, so I don't have to keep guessing. Otherwise, my picture is weird.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. That's actually, I have not gotten that question before, but yeah, I'm not sure if there's a Markdown way to do that, but I'm sure with some HTML magic, you can. Okay, sorry, that kind of didn't answer your question, but any other questions?
That's okay. That's okay.
Hey, Prerna, there's another question in the chat from Susan. What's your favorite punctuation and spacing codex or cheat sheet? Yeah, do you have some of those?
I do actually. So I will have some resources at the end. It's going to be the last slide. And so there are some like really good references there. Good question. And yeah, I mean, even though I'm giving this presentation, I always use references or like other Markdown files that I've used before to write my Markdown files. I don't memorize this by any means. So good question. Okay, so some extras. There are also, I should mention, this was a lot of basic syntax. There are plenty of other features in Markdown that you can do. This is just a couple, I guess this is the main stuff, and then I have a couple extras here. So just some fun ones. You can do emojis in Markdown. So one way you can do it is either copy and paste the emoji directly into the code. You can also use emoji shortcodes. So that just looks like, as you can see in that image, is just the name of the emoji surrounded by colons, and either way it'll render the same way. So here is a list of all of the emojis that are supported by GitHub. So once again, like really any emoji that you could ever imagine and more is supported. There are plenty of libraries out there. This is just the one from GitHub that you can use to reference. Okay. So let's see, sorry, my mouse, there it is, got it back. Now one more, like I mentioned a couple times, the HTML. So up here is how you include an image in a Markdown file. I know this is something that's also supported in Markdown, but with this, you can also change the size and add a couple other like fun HTML features. So I'm sure, there's a lot of HTML code that isn't supported, but you can kind of experiment with it. I certainly have been. It kind of makes your files a little bit more fun if there's features that you want to include that are not supported by Markdown. Another one is colored text, which again is also always really fun. Just kind of add a little bit extra to your files. So yeah, there's plenty of HTML code that's supported, and it kind of does depend on like where that code's going, GitHub versus GitLab and stuff like that, on what's supported and what's not. Okay, so I'm going to go through the summary and then I'll leave it open for a couple questions. So just to review, we talked about what is Markdown. Of course, it's a markup language. It's used for documentation, specifically in Git. Why should you learn Markdown? I encourage you guys all to do it to practice some GitOps. For putting our tests in code, we're putting, infrastructure as code. We're treating everything as code. That is the big push, especially in DevOps. Why not document with code as well, right? Why not save that in version control and get all of the benefits that you get from storing everything else in Git? And finally, how do you get started? So I gave you a couple tools that you can use. Here, I also have a ton of reference material. So over here, GitHub provides some templates. There's also, so since this was mentioned, I'll go through, oh, this is the templates. Oh, it's the link is, I'm sorry, the link is not working. It's not taking me to the right place. But there's also this Markdown guide. It's just markdownguide.com. And this is actually what I use all the time. It has like all of the syntax you've seen and even more than that. It also has a little cheat sheet on there, like someone mentioned, that you can use that I personally use when I write down my own code. And then also there's this repo. Let's see if this link wants to work. No, it does not. There's also this repo that you can probably just Google awesome readmes. It has a list of a ton of readmes that, again, you can use to like get inspiration to see how you want to format stuff, also as reference. Finally, you can also use my repository. So again, where all of my examples came from is public. I encourage you guys, if you want somewhere to get started, or if you want a refresher, you can go back there. At my GitHub is phodge-steampunk, and then it's just Markdown examples. So you can always use that as well. Okay, apologize that my links are not working. I hope that was helpful. Any questions?
Hey, Prerna, there's one more question from Susan, and she typed, I missed, for the spacing and tab key versus spaces, does it care if I use 4 spaces or 3? Is it more like YAML where it doesn't care just as long as everything in a group of items is all equally spaced?
Yeah, I do believe it's a minimum of 2. But it's certainly not as annoying as YAML, I'll tell you that. More of the specifics, I'm not sure. I always use an IDE to write my Markdown, so it will kind of like tell me if the indenting is wrong, and I'll just kind of fix it blindly. So yeah, I'm sorry if that wasn't helpful, but yeah, just 1 tab would work. I wouldn't like stagger it too much. Again, you do want it to be readable, right? You want it to be consistent, so yeah. Any other questions?
Now, you had mentioned using IntelliJ earlier. Were there any particular types of plugins that you recommend?
Yeah, honestly, I love IntelliJ. I could talk about it all day, but specifically for Markdown, there is one, I think it's just called Markdown. Actually, it's like pretty easy. You can just type it in and search for it. And I believe it does things like the colored text. It also does like it kind of suggests like basic like syntax and best practice stuff, like aside from like the obvious, like this is not going to work, this is going to break your code type thing. It really helped with reference style links as well. Like a lot of small things kind of like just are so much easier with that plugin. So I highly recommend it.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, if there aren't any other questions, thank you guys so much for your time. I really appreciate you guys coming over here and asking so many questions. I really appreciate like the interactiveness of this. This is great, especially for a virtual environment. Also, Jean, thank you so much for having me and pushing me to do this. I'm glad I finally did.
Thank you for finally joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much. Let me stop my share. Okay.
All right. And I did put a lot of those links in the chat as I could type them.
Thanks so much.
You can grab them out of there. And we will post this. I have to see with Cynthia where we post this after, but I will have we will get this posted at least in Slack, in the DCast Slack, as well as we'll have it available somewhere else, I'm sure.